Good afternoon. My name's Toby Marshall. I'm chair of the trustees of WorldRight, a A-level film and philosophy teacher, and I'm here this afternoon to talk about the subject of radicalism and to chair a discussion in this picnic in the park. The term radicalism takes its meaning from the Latin word radix or root, and in politics it refers to those who seek to bring about a fundamental change in the structure of society. Conventionally, it's a term that's used to refer to the far left of politics, but it's also used to refer to the far right. The foundational moment of modern political radicalism was, of course, the French Revolution of 1789. There's a lot of debate over the precise origins of the French Revolution, but it seems clear that the ideas associated with the Enlightenment played a leading role. The Enlightenment was a movement in thought which suggested that we should understand the world in terms of reason and evidence rather than divine revelation. And this new orientation to truth led many in France at the time to question the existing order, especially the arbitrary privileges of the monarchy, the clergy, and the aristocracy. Initially, many in England were deeply sympathetic to the revolution. At the time, Romantic poet Wordsworth wrote enthusiastically of events in the continent. Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. But as the revolution became increasingly violent and bathed itself in blood, many started to express doubts. Anglo-Irish politician Edmund Burke crystallised these sentiments in the Reflections on the Revolution in France, published in 1790. This was to become a cornerstone of conservative opposition to continental radicalism and a core text of those who are sometimes referred to as reactionaries. But the categories of radical and reactionary may not always be as useful as we would like to think. Today, our use of the term radical is complicated still further by its occurring in places where we might not expect. The political ideology associated with Tony Blair, for example, describes itself as representing a radical centre. Similarly, in education today, those that stand up for knowledge are described as conservative, whilst their radical critics deride this position and talk about a curriculum of the dead. So what does it mean to be radical today, and who are the reactionaries? Might it be radical to be a reactionary and reactionary to be a radical? So to discuss these issues, we've got an assembled group of volunteers. Let's find out what they think.
I wouldn't call politicians radical because they're already in the system, and it's kind of an oxymoron really. But somebody like Steve Biko to me was a radical because he came with a completely different perspective, a new way of looking at things, and his ideas I think are still radical today. You know, so I think there are some exemplary people that bring about huge change and a shift in perceptions and a shift in how we see things and where we want to go forward.
Okay, so that's an interesting idea. So we feel that to be radical, two things are important: to be outside of the system, and to have ideas of an alternative future of some description.
I think there is a lot of political statements floating about in form of selfies and in form of tweets that seem to be political, but really it's more like it's become fashionable to make these little statements without there really being any fundamental new idea or any fundamentally different old idea that is followed through. So even though there seem to be a lot of statements that might sound radical, I don't really feel there is many radical ideas knocking about at the moment.
What would be the criteria for something being a radical idea? Not just that it's alternative, but what else would it have to do?
For me, it would mean really attacking the root of whatever system you're criticizing and suggesting a very new mindset, a very new attitude that tends to be quite difficult to produce, really.
So that would bring us back to maybe the initial definition, which was some sense of proposing a fundamental change to the structure of society, something deep. Bringing those 2 points together, that rules out the idea of being radical from the centre, because that would to assume some responsibility for the system as it is.
I agree that radicalism is about attacking from the root, attacking the root of the problem or the issue. But I also feel that nowadays we have there's quite a negative stereotype attached to radicalism, as though every idea that's alternative to the mainstream idea is negative.
So I'd just be very interested in what everybody thinks about that, whether alternative ideas are celebrated in society and there's a strong emphasis on conformity, or whether, in fact, actually we find it difficult to agree on our moral norms today. I don't have the answer to that, but there's another reading, isn't there, which is quite interesting.
Jay, following up on your point on the negative connotations that radicalism has today, I give the example of universities, which used to be an institution where students were allowed to test ideas, to challenge the status quo. And now radicalism is associated with, for example, terrorism. You know, students are radicalized, almost like they're not able to cope with challenging ideas. So that's quite interesting.
That is interesting, because maybe both things are true, which is strong conventional ideas or strong radical ideas are both feared. Maybe the issue is that there's a problem with people holding strong ideas of any orientation at the moment, and maybe that's the character of today.
It's quite a tricky issue, getting into arguments with people about what's radical today. So it's pretty mainstream now to see yourself as pro-environment, pro-tolerance, pro-gay marriage, and all of those things. And anyone who even raises a criticism of them is kind of shot down, or your motives are suspicious. You're in the pay of the big corporations, or you're really conservative, and all of those kind of things. And it just becomes really, really problematic. I suppose one other thing that really strikes me is the way that what's considered radical has moved much more from issues around equality towards issues of difference. You know, what were your private differences that you kept to yourself, if you like, have now become the absolute centre of what politics is about.
When I was looking at the concepts of radicalism, I couldn't quite get to grips with it. I remember when I was younger being quite inspired by a quote, which I'll probably misquote, from William Blake, which was, "I was not born to be a part of another man's system, I was born to break systems." And I think nowadays what I see is a lot of dilution and ideas which are so broadly dispersed and that they become mainstream. And also they operate within these systems, whether it be via Facebook or Twitter. So they're automatically confined within a system that they're trying to fight against. And it doesn't seem to make much sense to me.
The whole dilution of actions, I think it goes back to what was said before about like selfies. An example could be, I think it was cancer awareness, and there was a lot of selfies being taken without makeup to show, I don't really know what it was to show, but it was just in support of trying to bring awareness to cancer. And I think that on a network, like on social networks, I think it's good that you're able to bring awareness, but to me that wouldn't count as radicalism. And I feel that some people use that as an excuse, maybe like with selfies, for example, just to demonstrate their own vanity.
I'd say we're being a bit more liberal on it, because in terms of Facebook and social networks, you can have pages for anything nowadays. There's a page called Seymour. It's very kind of out there, extreme, but they make light of situations, especially current events, current ideas, such as what's going on in Nigeria and stuff like that. But it's more of a political satire kind of way.
So maybe radicalism takes new forms today. It uses new media, it expresses itself through satire, and we should maintain an open position on new ways in which people can express their ideas. I think, for me anyway, I'd want to maintain that if we're going to define it as radical, and I don't think that necessarily means that we're saying it's good, it just means that we're defining it as radical. It could be radical and wrong, I think, that we would want to see that idea offers some sort of fundamental challenge to the structure of society. Otherwise, it wouldn't be radical. But within that, of course, it could be radically wrong, for example. I mean, fascism could be a form of radicalism in that sense, if it proposes a fundamental change to society.
Following up on the selfie, I don't think they're radical in any way, because really, I think it's cancer awareness selfie that was circulating around Facebook was really raising awareness, but it wasn't doing anything about tackling the problem. And for me, that's not radical, because it doesn't, it raises awareness. I mean, it's like bring back our girls hashtag.
Could I just push you on that a little bit? Was it the way in which the idea was expressed in the form of a selfie, or Twitter pictures being exchanged, or was it the content of the idea? Which was it that you didn't feel was radical?
It was really the content, because for me, it's much more useful to have a debate why, for example, those girls were taken by that Islamist group. There was real West intervention in those countries that made the crisis much worse, and that's something that we should discuss about rather than just raising awareness.
Could I ask you what a radical position would be on that issue? I mean, is there a right radical position to take, or is it just one where, I mean, maybe in some issues there isn't a radical position that is meaningful or useful to take? Would there have been a radical position in relation to those kidnappings?
I would say maybe challenge, for example, Barack Obama on the issue. For example, his wife posted a selfie, didn't she? But there was no discussion. For example, even the selfie, I have a problem with that. But for example, I heard that there was also a group of boys that were taken by the same group a few weeks before.
Oh, really?
Exactly. And there was no one talking about the fact that those boys were also taken. So there was also a focus just on those girls. And for me, I have an issue with that.
So following on from what Maurice has been saying about selfies, I do agree that there's something a bit too convenient about them. It's just a snapshot, and in a sense it's an oversimplification of a much more serious issue generally. And the other concern is that really within the main political parties, I'm failing to see anyone really suggesting a radical overhaul of the system as we have it. And I think this is why parties like UKIP are becoming the new radical, because just because they're saying something different, even though it's completely crazy, people see it as a viable alternative. And also amongst our generation and the young people, I don't see many new policies coming up in any kind of Facebook discussions or on Twitter. And it was the same with the Occupy movement a few years ago. Whilst there was some form of protest going on, nobody seemed to be particularly clear about what the protest was exactly about. And then it wasn't very easy to see what their suggestions were. And so it's generally a bit of vagueness and people kind of just wanting to be seen to protest for the sake of it, but not actually having any meaningful suggestions to make about what the alternatives to the current system might be.
I don't think the whole selfie cancer awareness thing was really radical. I think it was a form of protest, and I think we should celebrate the fact that so many people participated in it, and the fact that it raised so much money as well for cancer awareness. I think people are just ignoring that there was actually some positive effects through this whole selfie phenomena.
I find it a little bit strange that that's treated as radical, because essentially it's just a charity fundraising campaign at its heart. It's not proposing any actual changes to the political structure in society.
It's not radical at all, because I completely agree with you, but it is a form of protest, and I think we should accept that living in a digital world now, there are going to be different forms of protest that are going to occur through social media. So perhaps we should just accept it, that signs and symbols, for example, hashtags and selfies, they are going to be prominent in protesting in different issues in the 21st century.
I mean, I think that's interesting. We're coming back again to the form and the content issue, aren't we? Which is the way in which people convey political ideas today, which must necessarily be involving new media, I would have thought.
I feel like we're missing something more fundamental has changed, that what people consider to be radical is part of their identity, part of mainstream identity, and it is very kind of personal, cultural issues, the way you behave with people and difference and all of those kind of things. And one of the things that's kind of, you kind of think they're trivial issues really, there's not really a great deal to it. But then you start to see things like what's going on in Russia and the Ukraine, and there's this culture war broken out. And in the past, it would have been a geopolitical, they're invading here, or all of those kind of things. But it kind of started last year with a discussion over gay rights and Russia's attitude to gays, and really what our politicians are doing is saying we're more enlightened than you barbaric Russians. So you can see the potential of much more kind of personal issues of difference, different sexuality, becoming quite dangerous.
No, could I just push you on that a little bit? Are you suggesting that are you suggesting that there's no cultural differences in relation to sexuality between, let's say, England and Russia, or that we should be non-judgmental of their orientation towards sexuality in Russia?
No, I think it's sort of up to ordinary Russians to sort out for themselves, and us going in William Hague and Barack Obama really just polarised the issue with Russia, and even a lot of gay Russian groups are saying, okay, enough, just leave us alone now, we can sort it out. So, if the West is having a go at Russia over gay rights, then more than anything, they're going to dig their heels in and use it as a way of saying, well, this is what Russians are about, this is what our family values. It's not, and we didn't do away with Section 28, the anti-gay laws in the 80s, with Russian intervention or Nigerian intervention. We protested. I was involved in protests, and other people were here. And it was a genuinely radical thing to do at the time.
My problem with topics like the Bring Back the Girls movement and cancer awareness campaigns is that, they're not really. I don't actually agree that they're even a form of protest, because it's just really a statement of either support or opinion that in a way goes without saying. Who is for kidnapping school kids, or who is for a deadly disease? I do not think that they're radical, and also do not think that that's even a form of protest.
Because people were maybe quite politically apathetic, instead of getting involved in sort of ideologies and a deep political understanding, wanting to, rip things up, start over, or anything more sort of in depth than that. They're sort of trying to politicise these things that are really just, not political, just a form of saying, as you said, who isn't against cancer? It's just a way of raising awareness for it, really, and it shouldn't be political, and it's not. It's just raising awareness, and I think that's what the selfie campaign was, really. So I agree that it's not radical in any way.
I think it all goes back down to the mode of action, because I do think that awareness is always good, but I do think it depends on the action that you take after that. Now, we've talked about this. Let's meet up in the real world and discuss this and make movements to change the system that we've been talking about. Then it can go from being non-political to being political, or from non-radical and simply a selfie to something that actually has more substance in that sense.
Following on from what you said about cancer, I think what would be a radical position, or certainly veering away from the selfie campaign, would be people sort of standing up and saying, well, what are the cancer charities doing? Why are people still dying of cancer? Why isn't there another way to cure it? So I think just promoting a charity, we're advertising it for free, that's very unradical to me.
I think different forms of self-expression are also seen to be political when they're not actually political. For example, if people choose to wear certain clothes like the hijab, that's seen as a political message that you're resisting against, for example, assimilation or wanting to belong in a cohesive society. Or, for example, feminists, a lot of them are seen as being radical when they're not actually radical, and they're just expressing themselves in the way that they feel that they want to.
In regards to this new form of protest, which isn't protest at all, using modern media and technology to raise awareness is just part of communication. Doesn't necessarily translate into action. And I'm sure a lot of the issues that are being presented, the companies and the organisations involved must be rubbing their hands with glee, because everybody's been corralled into these small little areas on the internet, where previously people would be either going out on marches, which aren't necessarily in themselves doing anything, but it allowed you to mix and communicate with other people who were taking action. So I think there's a lot of shortcuts being taken, and people think, oh, I'm an activist because I share this, this issue that I've seen on Facebook. It'd be much better to actually get on your phone and telephone the company up and block up their switchboard so that they couldn't operate every single day than just pressing a button on your computer and basically publicising yourself.
I think there are some forms of internet protests which have been a little bit more successful, like the Avaaz petitions often cause some change in the government's policies in the countries they target. It's an organisation that relies on petitions, mainly via, again, I think Facebook and the internet, but it aims to collect signatures from people on issues such as, for example, somebody who's being flogged in relation to a rape. I think it was in the Maldives, and then because of the number of signatures, or partly because of the number of signatures that the petition picked up, the High Court sort of dropped the flogging penalty for that person. There has been a little bit more action resulting from social media, but for the most part, when it's just shared via Facebook, I'd agree that it's not necessarily leading to anything.
The Arab Spring, again, that's an example where it does work, but it's not a form of protest. It's just awareness. It's reporting.
Isn't the problem we're talking about what radicalism is a much more fundamental problem? Right at the core of society, the core institutions and politicians are embarrassed about what they do and would much rather side with what they see as radical. So to say you're an anti-cap now is, it's like saying you're a good citizen. And to say you're in favour of the system is, tantamount to saying you're a child molester or something these days. I think bankers are quite good. They do quite a good job. So, it's that conversation that keeps coming up is there's been this flip of what's radical and what's conservative.
Often the things that appear radical today don't put humans first, and I would want to argue seriously for that being a criteria for us assessing things. Is it putting humans and their needs front and centre stage?
My question is for you. So I understand that you're a teacher, so I just wanted to know your views on the current curriculum, and if you think that prevents us from thinking outside of the box, and if you think that it can hinder us from free thinking and it can hinder radical ideas.
Radicalism, as we're defining it here, it appears to be sometimes missing sort of bigger issues which are at the forefront of the political world today, which is sort of issues of immigration and race seem to be rearing their heads again and again, and I don't see a huge amount of radicalism countering that at the moment in politics or in the form of protests. So perhaps there are different targets for radicalism which currently people aren't as interested in, perhaps.
I think what's come out of this conversation this afternoon for me is that I don't care whether I'm radical or not, and I don't care whether I'm inside the system or outside the system. I think we shouldn't be sentimentally attached to any of those positions. I think in relation to particular examples, we have to ask ourselves not the question whether it's radical or not, but whether it's progressive or not, whether it advances human interest. Now, in relation to the curriculum question, there's many criticisms that could be raised in relation to the new national curriculum that's going to start next year. But I certainly would be a backer of that curriculum relative to what has preceded it, in the sense that that's a curriculum that puts knowledge at its forefront. And I think that's absolutely central to giving students a capacity to think about the world. And as it happens, here's a paradox, a defence of tradition is a condition for radicalism. I mean, you need to know something about the world if you're going to change it. And that's why within education, I think it's appropriate to be conservative with a small c, to preserve certain intellectual traditions as a precondition for renewing the world. That's all we've got time for this lovely sunny afternoon. If you would like to be involved in one of these debates, please email us. Thank you for watching.